And good morning, fellas. Good to see
Good
everybody this
morning.
morning. We got a special guest. Carl's got a special guest. What's your dog's name?
This is this is Kai. The other one is Kiki.
Oh, you have two, Kai and
Yeah, we got two. They're just about matched. This is the older one. She's about three, and the other one's about two. She's a little over three.
oh, that's cool. It's
Great.
good to see her, I assume, this morning. So
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, let's get
Yeah.
started. We're in the Gospel of John, which you guys are like fully aware. And so today we'll be looking. We've got, I think, one more week, 1 or 2 more weeks in the 14th chapter. Then we'll move to the 15th, of course. And last time we attempted to put ourselves in the place of the disciples through our table time and what it was like to get all this information. You know, they'd been with Jesus, walked with him, watched what he had done, how he had interacted, both with the public and with them, and now they sense something big in the air. This and the way Jesus is talking, and so we're kind of putting ourselves in that position. We'll be doing similar this morning. We observed Jesus talk about his leaving. Now that was monumental to the disciples. Masters do not leave their followers, but in this case, Jesus is saying that he is leaving, but there's another he calls comforter who will be coming in his departure, through his departure, and that's the plan for the future. We talked about the disciples' expectations, what they probably had based on the time and day they lived, the Roman occupation, the years and years of suppression. Where is God when you need him? Kind of thoughts, and what Messiah's hope would mean for the disciples. We then discussed, we went to personalizing it to how we would have felt, what we would have thought, and how we would possibly have responded in a similar circumstance. Jesus says to the disciples at these closing moments within the upper room, "Peace I leave you, peace I give you. Not as the world gives, do I give to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled, nor fearful. You heard that I said to you, I'm going away, and I'm coming to you. If you love me, you would have rejoiced because I am going to the Father, and the Father is greater than I. And now I've told you before it happens, so that when it happens, you may believe." Verse 27, words of assurance. Peace I leave you, peace I give you. And he makes a contrast. The peace that I am giving and offering is not as the world. And therefore, let not your hearts be troubled, echoing verse 1 of chapter 14. Jesus, being fully aware of his followers' perplexities and fears, induces the hope, peace I leave you, my peace I give you. The believability of his words, remember, he's shocking them with the words of his departure. But yet there's a faith basis, there's a belief, there's a trust, because it's based on their trust in him, which was developed over them living together over the 3-year period that they have been together. Naturally, they know Jesus as trustworthy, but his words right now at this moment, in regard to their future, those words are puzzling. Jesus states that his peace is different from what they know as peace. The implication is that his peace is not being free from difficulty, rather peace through difficulty. This is really important. He's saying that I'm offering you peace. That peace is different than the world. And another way of saying the peace that you know, not being free from difficulty, rather peace through difficulty. I think you and I have both heard multiple sermons on that subject. Paul labeled this type of peace as the peace which surpasses understanding. We can't figure it out, but I would venture that everyone on this call has experienced extremely trying times, and that you almost feel carried through those moments in peace because of the presence of God's Spirit. That we would attribute that emotional and yeah that emotional uh, boost through a very, very dark times. I've heard the testimony numerous times, and I've experienced myself. Thus, he's saying to them, no need to be troubled, no need to fear. And this echoes verse 1 of chapter 14. Word, and now continuing, you heard that I said to you, I'm going away and I'm coming to you. If you loved me, you would have rejoiced because I'm going to the Father, and the Father is greater than I. Okay, this is a bit puzzling for us. Jesus continues by referencing where their fears reside, and that's in abandonment. And he does that once again through promising his return through the helper. He echoes, verse 1. He speaks of this as a grander reality, and we're going to get to this, which at this point he understands, but they do not. If they knew, they would rejoice. That's what he says. If they knew, they would rejoice. And according to Jesus, the doorway to their knowing is love. So we're talking about the correlation of love and knowing and knowledge. There's where our mind is right now. This is a fascinating statement. This is something we don't talk about. Not, I don't think I've ever heard anything on this subject before between love and knowledge. Maybe you have, but I find it absolutely fascinating. But before we analyze this statement, I've got some graphic slides of a suggestion of how one way we could possibly think about this correlation. But before we go there, I'd like to just remind us of two side notes of really to dial us into the context. Side note 1 is that we know Jesus is about to induce the leaven. That's from our previous slides, which is going to change everything within the brackets of time. Now, this is in direct reference to what we talked about in 188b. When I used the term leaven, for those of you who weren't on that in that session, Jesus makes the analogy of what he's about to do on the cross and accomplish through the cross as a leavening agent that will have ultimate effect on the whole. And he talks about that, and I quoted that last time. We talked about God existing outside of the created the creation, and that's referring to the brackets of time. We live between two brackets called time, the material creation. But the idea is that God exists outside of that, and the created order is part it emanated from God. John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and all things were created through him and sustained through him. We read also in Colossians, and I believe in Ephesians as well, this idea of God existing. That is really paramount to what we're going to be talking about. Side note two, and bringing the context of what we're studying within to our worlds. Here's a situation that is absolutely terrifying to the followers. They're puzzled of hearing of his departure, and it. So what is terrifying to them is really great news. They just don't know it yet. And I think in our experiences, we go through difficulties in time that can actually turn out to be, I'm not saying every time, but I know it's been true in my life. I've gone through some very difficult times that as I look back, I say, I wouldn't want to go through it again, but I'm so glad I went through it because I changed. And I think that's part of our, part of our journey as followers. Now let's go dial into this idea of love and knowing, and I also included the term peace. So we're looking at these three things, and I'm suggesting one way to think about this. It's your choice how you think about it, my choice, but here's a way, and this is how I choose to think about it. We start with a subject and an object. Now we're in the context of love, knowing, and peace, or love, peace, and knowing. The subject could be you, it could be me, it could be God. And the object could be you and me. In some cases, the object can be God, of which it'll become apparent in a minute. But we have two beings, and there is a love exchange, there is a love implementation between a subject and an object. We're boiling this down to bare bones here. Love always occurs between a subject and an object, always. And that's what we're going to show. And here is love being initiated by the subject. There's love. And I choose to define love. Love in our minds resides in the area of the ethereal. It is vague. It is foggy. We can talk about aspects of love, and it's just part of being human. But I took a stab at a very rudimentary definition of love. And when a subject chooses to love an object, it is always positive. It is always for the well-being of the object. Always. That's what love is. There is an intention towards it. It is something which is motivated within the subject, an intention towards that object, and it's always positive. Thus, positive intention, and it's always directed towards something called the object. Always. And this includes knowledge. Verse 26. Love includes knowledge. Now, I choose to look at love like a type of energy, not a vague concept, but something that is actually real, something that exists. We could use the analogy of electricity we're talking in metaphors here, guys. But there is something real that is projected towards the object of I would call it love energy. We feel it when we're with someone we come encounter with, and when we leave, We are filled up. We feel so positive. We feel alive. That's because that person has given us their love energy. In the contrary, we've also been with people who suck life from us. They're a drag to be around. And we walk away and you go, do I have to go through this again? Because they are taking energy from us. And so this energy that I'm talking about, this energy state, is something that we can be actually cognitive. It can be part of our knowability. We can know. We can extend energy. Well, in this case, it's God to the object. We're talking right here. Now, what happens in this exchange? The energy has been extended from the subject. The question then becomes of reception. Reception. Okay, this energy. Let's think of it in electrical terms. Excuse me, I have a bit of a background in this. But the term for energy is wattage. It's an accumulative of volts times amps. Is the amount of energy that exists is wattage. So there's actually a watt. Now, guys, I'm talking metaphor here, so bear with me. But there's actually a real wattage that is offered to the object. But the question becomes then, does the object receive the wattage? Or is his switch open, to use an electrical analogy? So this idea of reception is next. Now, if that object receives love from the subject in the most primal way, that object feels loved. It becomes from a neutral position of object to I am loved. I would think everyone on this call has experienced the feeling I am loved. I would guess. There are human beings who exist today who have never felt that. And that is extremely sad. I am one who is loved. If God is the subject, we could add, I am one who is loved by God, if that one receives it. It's optional. And then once that occurs, if I realize I am loved, I receive that wattage. I receive that energy in a very real sense. I feel alive. I feel like I have something to extend, and I can love God back. The subject, it can return to God, that love. I am then able to love God and or I am able to love another object. The basic idea here is, fellas, is that unless I receive love, I cannot love. Because love is a gift. It is first received. Then, as it's received, I am able to give that. And to what degree? This ties directly with the text, so bear with me. Love always begins with the subject, always. Thus we read, God is love. That is absolutely paramount. God is love. 1 John 4:8. We see it not only in 1 John 4:8, but it gives us some degree of a lens in order to interpret the fact of God as love throughout the entire Bible. God is love. And that is the primary idea. God is always present, like we talked about in 188b. Thus, love is always present. Think of God's presence through the creative and sustaining presence of the Holy Spirit. This is what I believe. And because God is here, every crack and void that exists as part of our life, God's presence is there. That means that love is present everywhere. It is here. It is here and now. I just thought of a story. There is a Pixar movie that goes back a few years called Soul. And in the movie, the woman, there's a woman, you can look this up on the internet, and she tells a story. And the story is she's telling this to another person and a man. And she says, I heard a story about a little fish. And that little fish went to an older fish and said, I'm looking for the ocean. And the bigger fish said, you're in the ocean. And the little fish said, no, this is water. This isn't the ocean. There's a lot of thought behind that, fellas. Life is about here and now. It's not about looking for a better whatever it's going to be on the other side. It's about here and now. We are in the ocean, and God's presence is all around us. And it's about waking up to what is actually real. That's what this is about. How one receives is optional and variable. That is the kicker. This whole idea of reception. We talk about receiving Christ. I'm all in today, at this moment, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow. Unfortunately, the way we have cast that from a broader perspective, it's about a one-time reception, and then it's kind of a skate mode from there. I think that is really unfortunate. It's about right here and right now. And to what degree? How one receives dramatically influences what happens from there. It's all in this idea of reception. Now we're going to move to the next slide, and I'm going to throw out a ridiculous idea. So bear with me as an illustration, okay? And here we've got the same images. We've got love as a love energy moving towards the object from the subject. It's all about positive intention towards. And the ridiculous question is, is it possible to love a rock? Some inanimate object. Is it possible to love a rock? Well, if I were a geologist, I would answer yes. Of course, I can love a rock. That geologist is moving throughout an area of choice and has his little hammer in his bag, and he's looking around, and he finds the perfect rock because he's in search of what he wants. That's a love. That's a love. And he takes that rock, he uses his little hammer, and he takes a portion of that rock, and he takes it back to his laboratory, and he puts it on display as depicting what is really important to the subject. He's the subject, the rock is the object. And so I would say it is possible to love a rock. Now, even more ridiculous, is it possible for a rock to receive love? Well, this is where I would differ. And I would say this. A rock is not conscious, and I think anybody could accept that. A rock does not think. However, side note here, it's really interesting to look at what Jesus said, even the rocks would cry out in this, when during the triumphal entry. So we're not here to talk about that, but a rock is not conscious. We know that. A rock has no choice. If a rock is to be loved by the geologist, Ross doesn't have a choice. Therefore, a rock can only come under the entire influence of the subject. Either the rock is under the entire love influence of the geologist, or the rock remains as is. There is no middle ground. It's either you're totally in, the rock is in, or the rock has not been identified, one or the other. Now, I take that ridiculous example and contrast being human. You and I are conscious. That's part of us. And that's a wonderful way that we have been created. We are conscious. We can think. We are self-aware. We therefore, because we're conscious, we have a choice in regard to, listen to this, if and how we receive love. Have you guys ever, I would venture, at least some of us have ventured to say, a time when I have not received love, someone's trying to love me, but I harden my heart, I harden my, the scripture says, harden my neck, and I refuse to receive it. I've experienced it, and I've seen it multiple times. Receiving love is very difficult for us human beings. It's not in or out, it's linear. To what degree? Receiving love is vulnerable. If I, at this tender moment, submit to what is occurring, it may make me look weak. I mean, that's really unfortunate, but it's so true. Dave Brown, go ahead.
I'm just going to offer that receiving love is an example or part of the definition of grace. And it is true that many of us are not very graceful, particularly in that regard.
Thank you, Dave. Do you have other comment? I don't want to cut you off. I think grace is very close to a grace. We're not good at receiving grace. I've experienced myself, and I've seen it multiple times. Yeah, Bill, go ahead.
I was having a thought in this world when you're young and you're trying to meet your future mate and they go through this thing called courtship. I'm sure we've all had situations where we thought there's this one lady is the one we want, but somebody else wants her too. And she has to make a decision who she's going to accept. So it's not like she doesn't receive love, but she has to choose who to receive the love from, and vice versa. We had maybe two different women who one wants us and that's not for me, and I have to reject that. So I mean, it's more on a real personal level here, but sometimes you do have to reject love, especially in the world of choosing a mate.
Okay, there's an example of choice. Within that, there is some sort of internal consciousness going around and analyzing and so forth. That's a gift from God to do that. Right. And the choice is made.
Well, and what's spinning in my head, of course, is First John. We love because God first loved us. I mean, that kind of puts a stamp of validity on your entire talk here. That passage.
I'm attempting to be biblical here, Bill.
Yes, you are.
Yeah, thank you. I know I'm slowing this way down for a reason, because probably we have not thought of love as well, it's a noun. I was thinking of it as a verb, something that actually energizes us, something real that is past is really an interesting way to look at this. And as we get to the words of Jesus, it's all going to come back right on around to look at that text. If you would have loved me, you would have rejoiced. Even now, think about that in light of what we talked about. If you would have loved me, now prior to that is they have to receive love. They are loved by Jesus. And if they are able to receive, they are able to love. And if they are able to love, they would have seen the situation entirely different. So let's go there. How I receive love, it's not a binary act of in or out. It is a linear act of to what degree I'm able to accept it. This is part of being human, and it works a lot to our disadvantage. How I receive love dramatically affects everything about my life. Number three, a way to think about reception. Okay, here's now we're going to dive into reception, into this idea. We've talked quite a bit about it, and I've got just a couple more things. So there I'm circling it, this idea of reception. We're proposing, or I am proposing, to think of love as an energy we are invited to receive at any given moment. Now, this would be converse to the language of receiving Christ once and for all. I'm all into receiving Christ, but I've made it very clear. It's a union, it's a relationship, it's a living under the influence of, and moment by moment. And we're invited. The degree to which I receive this love is the degree to which I am able to extend this love to others. Again, a paramount statement. Unless I'm able to receive, I am not able to extend. To the degree that I can receive is the degree that which I can extend. Based entirely on what Jesus is saying to his disciples at this moment in John 14, this transfer of love is knowable. It is in the realm of knowing. Verse 26. Action, and it actually creates, this is how I'm, an analogy that I'm using. It actually creates a change of state within the follower. I mean, have you ever been in dire circumstances and you receive ministry and life from the Holy Spirit, or through someone, just say through prayer, and you walk away uplifted? There's a change of state. Your circumstances haven't changed, but you have, and I have. And that's a wonderful reality of the Spirit's presence with all around us. And it actually creates a change of state within the follower. And here's the quote. If you loved me, Jesus says, you would have rejoiced. If you loved me, you would have had a change of state. You would have seen it differently. They're in fear. They would have been in rejoicing. And it's where they are. It's not condemning. It's a truth. So where does peace fit in this idea about peace? We know it's going to be different than what the world calls peace. Jesus implies that the follower must first receive love. I've made that really clear, and I think we can build a really strong case from the text. We have to, Bill, you quoted 1 John. We receive love, we can then love. I think it was 1 John. Once the follower, it sounds like 1 John, once the follower receives love, they will then know, verse 26. And that's a week ago. And when one knows, one is able to act in response entirely through what that person has received. He's under the think of it being under the influence of, instead of a drug of some sort, being under the influence of this love energy that exists and that's real. Reception of love enables an inner state of change. In this case, the change is from fear to joy. And Jesus is saying, if you'd love me, if you would have loved me, you would be rejoicing, because your state of change would be entirely different. This exchange from reception of love to extension of love is what is equal to peace. Thus, peace through difficulty, not free from difficulty. I receive love, I'm able to extend love. What follows is what I've been talking about for several weeks now, me through you. That's what Jesus is preparing. That's the big one. He's preparing his disciples. Last slide before the table time. Oh, we're in good shape. I have told you, he says, before it happens, he's a great friend, so that when it happens, you may believe. I'm not going to leave you hanging. Oh, he's a great leader, great master. Verse 29 is like a bridge. This is how I see it. On the far side resides what is true, what Jesus is fully confident in. Remember, he comes from the Father. He's returning back to the Father. It's what he sees because he knows, and where he is leading his followers. Jesus sees that on the far side of the bridge. On the near side of the bridge are the perplexed and fearful followers within their current state as a group, and it's foggy. Man, they're in a foggy soup. All they see are the puzzled faces of each other gathered in the circle. They're in and out of this, think of this foggy haze that's there, and they can just barely make out the faces of their friends in perplexity. They barely see their master's face, but they can hear his voice, and he's speaking. What they hear him saying is something like this: follow me. There is a bridge right over here, which you will soon see. This bridge will lead us to the other side. As you follow me, placing one foot in front of the other, our joint destination will slowly come into view. Can you picture it? What Jesus is saying, sorry, I lied to you. It's not the last slide. I guess I added one. What Jesus is saying is in direct correlation to everything he has been saying in regard to preparation for what he's about to do. This is not new, guys. This is a continuation of how he's preparing his disciples for me through you. If the disciples can receive his love energy, which we've talked about, which is being offered in the moment I call this belief. That's a way of thinking about belief, receiving love energy. Then when the bottom drops out, which the disciples don't understand, but it's going to happen like within the next hour, they will have what they need, love energy, to move forward from there. This is mission based solely on belief within the moment. Receiving of love energy gives us the ability to act, and I call that mission. Mission to move in a productive and life extending sense. Moving forward is always one step at a time. At least it's been in my life. I can't say I've ever gotten the big picture. You know, the set of instructions where you open it up. Boy, it would have been nice, but it's just that it doesn't work like that. It's moment by moment. The entirety of what he's talking about is peace. John 14:7. This is peace. This moment by moment receiving, this listening, like we talked about, this receiving, this course correction, and this moving, all within the promptings of the Spirit of His presence, which is here right now. Man, if that is exciting. Now, here we are. Let's imagine ourselves in the foggy soup hearing this for the first time. We're on the edge of the bridge. We can't see the bridge, but we hear it's there. As you hear Jesus talk, you begin to understand that what he's inviting you somewhere, he clearly sees and understands, but you do not. You know, just making that distinction is really a healthy thing. Just to say, I don't know. Help, oh God, help me. That's where prayer comes in. Because of trust, you believe him, but you also have fear because of uncertainty. That's natural. That's very natural. And I think he's fully aware of that. And we think about, gee, what about my immediate future? How am I going to pay my bills? What about, have I saved enough for retirement? Oh boy, there's everything out there to create promptings of fear. And it's just ruthless. It's all around us. And to cause us, when we fear, we lose that love energy, and it's a snowballing effect, and it leads to a lot of unnecessary stuff. You realize he's asking you to step forward onto the bridge. You can get that. That's all you hear. Follow me. I'm going to lead you across this foggy bridge. Now, describe your thoughts and feelings. As you're hearing this, fellas, your thoughts, your feelings, your questions, your doubts, what's going on inside of you? Let's talk about that.
You know, Mike, I feel sort of the energy in terms of receiving your teaching
Oh,
this morning, because it does sort of bring that realization that love really is energizing. It's empowering, and the empowerment partly comes from feeling safe. But you know, he is asking you to step forward onto the bridge. I see that on your table time slide here. I think sometimes part of the fearful thing for me is I don't, sometimes I feel like I'm being pushed onto the bridge rather than being asked to take a step forward. There is both. It's the being pushed onto the bridge that that brings fear for me.
That's a really, I, I'd like to, would you be willing to talk a little more about that, Steve? I think it's a fascinating idea, something I hadn't thought about. And the question in my mind is, in your mind, who's doing the pushing? Where's the
Yeah.
pushing coming from?
Well, it brings to mind is, do we love and serve a good God? When we've been pushed onto the bridge, so to speak, by the so-called circumstances of life that God could or has chosen not to control. You visit the doctor and you get a dire diagnosis. You feel like you've been pushed onto the bridge or pushed into the fog as your foggy soup.
Yeah, there you
You
go.
know, and we've all had those circumstances. You've talked about it right at the beginning of this, and it tests. It tests our ability. We wonder if we're still receiving love, because it doesn't feel like it. We don't feel that energy right then, so to speak, because all of a sudden it's like the object that's been sending us love is sort of seemingly sending us something else.
Very good, Steve. Many of us on this call have gone through dire circumstances, and the bridge, you find yourself, I think what you're saying, Steve, you find yourself on this very foggy bridge. And I'm assuming because we're believers in Christ, we hear, we're wondering, where is God in all this? I'd like some of you to respond to that. Great question, Steve. Some of us have gone through very serious loss, very serious. And why are we still in? Why are we still believing? I mean, would be one question. How did you feel at that moment? Was God real at that moment? Sure, there's perplexity in the fog. Those are great questions, Steve. I'd love to hear your responses.
I thought it was interesting, Mike, that, and I'm going to hopefully be able to tie this into what Steve was saying, but Jesus said, if you loved me, you would be glad that I am going to the Father. He didn't say, if I loved you. The love from Christ is always there. And you talked about being able to receive that love.
Received. Yep.
Part of, in your electrical analogy here, is that things that get in the way, that cause static, that cause us to have an inability to receive that love fully. Not that we're not getting bits and pieces of it.
Yeah.
But that static in our lives, and maybe that's something of what Steve is talking about, when something tragic or something happens that causes us to question that love that is there, then it becomes static and we don't fully receive it. Therefore, for me, it makes it much more difficult to step out in faith into the fog, into the goop. Because of what's happening, it becomes an impedance to receiving that love that is always there. And that way I cannot rejoice in what's going on because of I'm not fully receiving that love, which is, which then impedes my ability to love back, to love,
Yeah.
you know, and somebody said it earlier, we love because we were first loved.
Yeah.
If we're not fully receiving that love, it impedes our ability to love back and to fully understand what Christ was saying in that I'm going to the Father. They couldn't see that.
Jeff, you have very accurately stated exactly what I was trying to get across. So that makes me that's my perception. It's all about our ability to receive. We're not a rock, we're not in or out. There are degrees. And Steve mentioned safety. Great idea. Safety, I refrain from receiving because I feel vulnerable. There's a vulnerability that is there for whatever reason. There's numerous reasons, and so therefore I don't receive. It's scary, it's threatening. But if I feel safe, I mean, if I feel safe and someone is trying to love me, well, it would only seem natural for allow that to happen.
Now, of course, this is a gross simplification, but this is the essence of the long pole of in the tent of our faith, what we're talking about here. You know, do we believe? Do we have faith or not? When things get ugly and bad, you get the dire diagnosis from the medical office or whatever.
Yeah.
Do we believe? Do we trust? And one of my study aids, going back to verse 27 again, talking about he's saying, I'm leaving you with peace. In the Greek, in the second part of the verse, it kind of emphasizes the meaning through the Greek, and it says, your heart must not ever trouble you.
Wow.
And it must stop being timid.
Stop being what? I didn't hear that.
Timid.
Timid?
Yeah, stop being timid.
Wow.
Don't be afraid. So that's the challenge. That's the gauntlet of faith, if you want to. And I'd say this is a gross simplification.
Yeah.
But there it is. You know, there it is. Your
Yeah.
heart needs never to be troubled. It's not to be troubled, and you're to stop being timid. You keep going. You keep on.
Yep. My thought, Dave, went to the bridge. I have got to be the one that puts one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. Don't be timid.
Yeah. Yeah.
Don't
I can't
be stupid.
see.
Don't be
can't
foolish.
See. Yeah.
Don't be foolish, but don't be timid.
Yeah. Yeah. He's telling me that there's a bridge. I can't see it, but I'm going to believe him, and I'm going to step out. One step, and it's always, Dave, for me, it's always one step at a time. I just don't get the picture. I don't get the whole thing, you know? It's just a step at a time.
I heard in another teacher preacher doing an analogy one time. It relates to your energy analogy, and you got this. You live in the mountains, and you've got these mountain roads and these trails and all the rest of this, and you've got this beast of a vehicle in your garage or in your driveway that can navigate those things. It's got four-wheel drive, it's got traction, it's got all kinds of, and I don't even know the terminology, you know, it's all there, it's ready, and it will work, but it won't work if you don't put the key in the ignition and turn it on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that we could really take that analogy and have some fun with it, you know. And in my way of thinking, I'll pop the hood and I'll try to change this or check that, do it, all this stuff, and all I had to do was turn the key on. That's really true. Well, I wish I didn't have to cut this off, but it's 8 o'clock, and guys, wow, I would say this, you know, we've had some really good discussion. Only a few of us got to share, but that idea of stepping forward, Steve, great question. bringing out, what do you do when the bottom falls out? If we would have had time, we could have heard from more of you who have actually experienced that, because we have, and we're still here. You guys have a good week, and yes, we will meet next. Today is today's the 7th. Next week will be the 14th, and I'll be here. And I believe we'll be wrapping up the end. Let's see, we're 20, 30 and 31, I think, is next week. So you can
It's-
party the fact that we will actually finish something. So
And Mike, that's also Ash Wednesday, and our church is having an Ash Wednesday service at 8 in the morning, so I won't be on. It's also Valentine's Day, so talk about love, you know.
Oh, that's a good idea. Love is a great subject.
It is.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about love when you're going to be talking about the prince of this world.
I don't know how we'll tie that in. Jeff, maybe you can. Yeah. So,
Yeah, I'm not sure I can.
well, I think we'll go ahead and meet next week. Bill will miss you, but let's just go ahead and do that, and have a good rest of your week, guys. Good to be with you all. Thanks for those of you who shared back and questions and all that. And we'll see you on the 14th. Bye for now.
See some pictures, Steve. Okay.